personally offered to pick Geeta and bring her to the office, so I am as much to blame because I didn't perhaps plan for enough time to travel. We took more than an hour to come from Delhi, which is a bit unusual. Normally it takes me about 40 minutes. But first and foremost, a big round of applause to welcome our guest, Geeta Rao. So this is the second event that we are having, courtesy all the work that Palomi, Jay, Rajinder do to get these events together. We had the proud privilege of having Muhammad Khan as our first speaker. And I'm equally proud, if not more proud, to have my very, very close friend, associate of more than 25 years, Geeta Rao today as our guest. Ivan, where is that printout here? As you know, we've already put out 4 ads featuring some of our prominent alumni. And for today, I made sure that young Kaiwan had created this really nice ad. I think you're seeing it for the first time also, Geeta. Let me show it to everyone. Oh, let me show. There's a big one. Yeah?
Oh dear, Kaiwan, I said, don't do so much. I only want 10 lines. This is like really embarrassing. This is so much.
So it says how Rediffusion influenced an influencer. So we are going to hear that influencer story live from Geeta later today.
Oh dear.
So, did you ever believe that you would have an ad written on you?
Never.
Huh?
I'm going to be like a client.
And I'm very, very happy that when I got Geeta in, the first thing we did was to go down to Everest, and Viru and his team showed her 2 absolutely fabulous projects that they are working on for the 75 years of Everest. And I'm sure, Geeta, whatever you saw was good. Thank you. So, both the 75 years of Everest and the 50 years of Rediffusion celebrations are beginning to pick up more and more momentum. I normally do want every time to use this forum when we have everybody together and all the offices connected to thank, congratulate, and give a big hug to some people who've done exceptionally well in that little interim between the previous lecture and the next. So, first and foremost, a big bra and a big congratulations to young Ramachandran from Chennai office for having won the Delhi duty-free business. You will all be happy to know that the entire business of DDF, as you see it at most airports, Delhi duty-free, is now handled by Rediffusion Chennai, and all single-handedly brought in by Ramachandran. Pramod's not here, he's shooting with the monsoon in Kerala, but a very, very big round of congratulations to Pramod for the conversion we made on 3 very big accounts out of Delhi, which is Naukri.com, Jeevansathi.com, and 99 Acres. And of course, young Kalyani, as always, has been in the lead with some really stunning work from Viru and team for having converted one very, 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 very nice Roli-Poli Sadaji called Tainor.
That credit goes to you.
You did see Tainor around in the office a few days ago. They formally sent us a formal communication saying they will work with Rediffusion. So, one client out of Delhi for DDF, one Delhi client again for Naukri, one Chandigarh client for Tainor, And there are many more which I am not going to cover. Mr. Gupta has a big list of clients who are all awaiting half a signature or one signature or whatever. But at least 3 of them are huge accounts, all done. We know they're already in the bag, but till they're all signed up and home, I don't want to talk about them. But without announcing their names, let's give a big round of applause to Mr. Gupta. So, and now to the pleasant task of introducing my friend Geeta, who I first met in 1997 when I moved to Bombay as president of Rediffusion. You were already there?
Yes, I was already.
Yeah. Now, as is my want, I don't hold back. So I want to tell you that while I moved to Rediffusion Bombay as president from Delhi, despite being what you would presume to be the #1 position in the company, it wasn't exactly a very pleasant welcome. So I'm going to tell you a very interesting story and then we will talk about Geeta coming into that. But I walked into what was then the famous Ready Money office, and first and foremost, we had 2 offices those days. One was at Sterling Center, which is where the corporate, top brass used to sit, and Ready Money, which was Bombay office. So I was told that since I was top brass, if you were president, you were top brass, I suppose. So I was told that I should sit at Sterling. I spent 2 days there, decided, boss, this is too stuffy, mere bas ka nahi hai. So I decided one morning that I would operate from Ready Money. So I moved to Ready Money. So my habit, I sort of walking around the office, so I kind of went into the branch manager's room. So I looked over his shoulder and he was playing solitaire on the com. So I tapped him on the back. He was a good, I think, 15, 18 years senior to me in age. And I tapped him on the back and I told him, I said, listen boss, this is office time, not time to play solitaire. Walked off. Next day, I was again doing my morning round. I again went back. The same gentleman, head of the office, was still playing solitaire. So I again tapped him on the back and I told him this time, I said, hey, I told you this yesterday, I'm saying this now to you for the second time. This is office time and this is no place to play solitaire. Now, inevitably, third day, I went back and what happened? He was still playing solitaire. And I told you he was, 15, 18 years senior to me. He was an IIM Cal graduate, well-known guy. So I tapped him on the back. I said, do you understand English? He says, yes. I said, 3 times in a row now I've told you, you are not supposed to play solitaire in the office. Don't we understand that? So he says, I am the head of office. I said, well, I am the head of the company. So I am telling you one simple thing, that you cannot play solitaire in office. So he says, why don't you let me run the branch? I said, we're not running the branch, boss, you're playing solitaire. So he said, well, that's my style. I said, okay, then let me tell you what is my style. So I tapped him on the back, I said, get up. So he didn't figure out what was he supposed to do when I said, get up. I said, get up. So he got up. I said, door is wide open, you're sacked. Now, that didn't exactly make me the most popular new president to have at Rediffusion. Now, given those circumstances where I wasn't terribly the most, liked guy in that office, I had the second piece of good, interaction that I had. I met a guy 3 days or 4 days into Bombay called Craig Middleton. And he came down from New York and I said, so who are you? So he said, I head the Colgate business worldwide. I said, that's very good news. Bolo. So he said, I have come to give you some good news. I said, tell me, what is it? He said, you guys are sacked. I said, what? I said, who's sacking whom? He asked me. So he said, I said, who do you work for? He said, I work for Young and Rubicon. So I said, we are Young and Rubicon. He said, yes, but we are sacking you. I said, why? He said, well, we are sacking you, that's it. So I said, so how do we now get out of being sacked? And the trump card in getting out of being sacked was the lady here called Geeta Rao. Right? So Geeta Rao came in to Rediffusion with a very clear mandate, which was to run the Colgate-Palmolive sponsored Palmolive Femina Miss India contest. Yes? So she was basically recruited to run that one property. So you can understand how important that property was. For those of you who do not know, the first time that Palmolive sponsored the Femina Miss India contest is the year when Sushmita Sen, Aishwarya Rai and Diya Mirza won the crown. And the last year was the year when Priyanka won the crown, and after that they didn't win it for many, many years. Right? So it was Geeta's responsibility to run that absolutely most important property of Colgate and Rediffusion. So that's when I first met her. When she speaks, I will interject, add, but I have a very important, very special old friend, Geeta's, mine, and a Rediffusion alumnus who has been on hold for the last maybe 45 minutes, maybe more. So I'm going to ask Mr. Gupta to get her live, and she's going to talk about the Geeta Rao she used to know at Rediffusion, and a very special episode which all of you will enjoy. So that screen there.
Thank you for coming.
So can we get a live, please? So that does go. Yay!
Good afternoon. Sandeep, I have to say Geeta.
I'm right here. How do I do it?
Well, how do we get her on?
Say hi.
Hi.
Looks like Shrestha.
Geeta, I don't even.
Oh my
How are you?
God.
Oh, good to see
This
you.
is crazy. Where did he find you from?
No. I never
I don't want to
get
hear
home.
this.
So let me introduce to you Ravpreet Kaur, now Ravpreet Ganesh, who was at Rediffusion 25 years ago, one of our brightest and best, and now one of the leaders of the Publicis group. She's live from Delhi. And over to you, Ravpreet. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh my God.
I kind of figured out that this was happening. I reached out and I said, I really have to be there. So amongst many stories that Sandeep will tell you about her, the one which is closest to my heart and where I first met Geeta. So I was working in Repute in Delhi. That's where I started my career actually. Sandeep calls me one day and he's like, Ravpreet, we have to do this campaign and I want you to take care of it. So as always, I was like, yeah, sure, without even knowing what karna kya hai. So I get out of the room and I'm like, so he hands over a paper and he's like, yeah, phone kar lo, pata kar lo. So I go figure out, on the other line there's this very bright IAS officer. She tells me that this is about 300 years of Khalsa and we really have to make this big splash. That's when it strikes me. I come running back to Sandeep and I'm like, amazing, I really want to work on this, but I need someone who can partner me with this. He's like, thoda time do, I will figure it out. Next thing I know, there is Geeta in his office, who's flown down, and he's like, meet Geeta Rao, Geeta, meet Ravpreet. That is it. Okay, so before we can figure out, and of course Geeta did amazing work, but that's not the story. The story is that Geeta and I now, we have to go to Chandigarh to meet this gentleman who, the earlier senior partner, who was then the chief minister. This is pretty much when Punjab was getting out of their problems. So imagine a Chandigarh, which in the 90s, you still had vehicles with police and armed officials all over the place and all of that stuff, right? So now Geeta and I are put on hold. And we are told that one day chief minister will call. We're like, okay. Day 2, it strikes Geeta dude, I don't have anything to wear suitable. I'm like, no, you're dressed properly. He's like, maybe we should buy a salwar. So Geeta and I go hunting around Delhi and find a salwar. Geeta buys a salwar. Very, very James Bond 007 kind of story. A receptionist called me. We have no idea tonight or tomorrow morning or when are we supposed to go and see the chief minister with our work. The receptionist calls, Madam Ji, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਕੋਈ ਆਇਆ ਹੈ. For all of you who don't understand Punjabi, which basically means there's someone for you. And the other end is this rough sounding man who's like, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਥੱਲੇ ਆ ਜਾਓ ਜੀ, sir ਨੇ ਬੁਲਾਇਆ. So I'm like, Geeta, I think this looks like it. So we carry our rubber bag, both of us go, we sit in this ambassador, and we have no idea where we are going. There is police escort, front, back, we go. We are in Mr. Badal's dining room, who decides that these girls are very, very hungry or eat what we were. We present the work to them, and Captain Sir, who has just kind of retired from the politics, I think he has. We present the work, very nice, all good. He invites us to have dinner. So we have dinner. Then he tells his wife, नहीं कुड़ियाँ लोग खीर खुआओ. So imagine this is the conversation which is going on. There is Geeta, who has probably got her first salwar kameez the day before yesterday. She has no idea what the man is saying. Okay, and we're sitting in this large room. It's about 9:30 in the night right now. It gets better. So, and there is me trying to kind of, Geeta's Hindi, which I assume has got a little better, and her, English. And conveying it to the old gentleman who refuses to talk in any other language except for Punjabi. And he decides that now he has to show all his paintings to me. Okay, so he has this lovely collection on the wall. And he takes Geeta Rao. So there is him talking in Punjabi and Geeta nodding very seriously. Yes, I get it. This artist, that artist. So we have to do all of that. Of course, we come back. We come back to Delhi. And Sandeep's question to me was, Geeta, you samajh aa gaya jo kiya sin unhone? I'm like, yeah, she got it. But I mean, honestly speaking, Geeta, jokes and stories apart, I think for me, tiny career that I have, that remains as one of those very, very special, unique moments. So when I figured that this was happening, I literally hounded Sandeep and I'm like, I really have to be there and she will kind of talk about all of this. So thank you so much for having me, and it is such a privilege and an honor to have worked with you. I personally thought this was very, very good.
Thank you very much.
Oh my God.
Geeta, all yours.
I have to correct Rakpreet, okay? I do understand Hindi and Punjabi. I can write Hindi, that's my mother tongue. Rakpreet, my Hindi is only improved, but it wasn't that bad. Okay, I have to tell you this campaign. I mean, I'll talk about it when I speak later in my talk, but this campaign had to be presented in English, in Hindi, and in Punjabi. Every time it was presented. Rakpreet, of course, was the one doing the Punjabi and doing a very good job of it. But I did read the Hindi, so don't malign me, Rakpreet. And the story about that, well, we'll talk about that. But that 300 years of Khalsa campaign remains one of those campaigns. The campaign never ran for reasons we can discuss offline. But it really is one of those campaigns where the experience was priceless. You're never going to get that experience. And I was very much out of my own comfort zone because I'd only worked on multinational businesses. Even within the Indian advertising, whatever, my businesses had always been the multinational businesses, the Unilevers, the Colgates, etc. So it was a totally different experience. Protocol demanded many things that happen with the chief minister. There are protocols at every stage when you present. So it was a very exciting time. And that was thanks to Sandeep because he's the one who got that campaign. But thank you very much for having me. I've worked on actually writing all my stuff out because I don't know how many people will identify with this, but I would much rather have sent you an email with my thoughts and my random pieces of wisdom rather than standing up here. This is not my comfort zone, but I will try and see how I can take you down a few memories of Rediff. We had great times. My own time at Rediff was very short, so you might wonder why I'm here. I was there only for 2 years, but it was an extremely intense 2 years. So many things happened in those 2 years. It was a very exciting time to be at Rediff, and I'll talk about it a little bit. But first and foremost, I want to congratulate all of you for being at Rediff. You are in one of India's most storied agencies, and you now have it in you to carry this great legacy forward and to take it to newer heights, which I'm sure Sandeep has already planned for the agency. So congratulations all of you, and it's a historic time. It's a historic time once again to be at Rediffusion. My own, I must tell you this little, anecdote. My own first experience of Rediff was already a very storied agency when I was in college. And my first experience was when my sister, who studied at the IIT in Mumbai, was hired as an intern at Rediff. And I was so excited, and I wanted a sneak peek into India's great agency. And in those days, Rediff was ahead of the curve as far as technology was concerned. They had a mainframe, they had a separate room, and there were people, you had to punch in cards and write the program. And there were people hired for that from the various IITs at that time. And it was wonderful to see what Rediff was accomplishing in those days. And there were people queuing up from IITs and IIMs to be hired as summer interns at Rediffusion. And the reason I say this, of course, Rediff.com became one of the leaders of the .com movement, and that legacy continues in some way, I'm sure, at Rediff. But it really is important because technology has made a full circle. You can no longer write your creative strategy, you can no longer write your business strategy without actually making technology a part of it. So it's really one of those great and important learnings at Rediff. And I joined Rediff 10 years later. And again, as Sandeep said, I joined specifically on the Colgate-Palmolive, the Palmolive part of the Colgate-Palmolive business. And it wasn't, besides the Miss India property, there was Palmolive soaps, which were extra care, doing really well. There was Optima shampoo, but it was really a niche assignment which I really wanted to do, and it worked out really well. It was the kind of dream assignment I'd been looking for, so it was great to join Rediff. Again, as I said, storied agency, and it was a really exciting time to be at Rediffusion. And the background of that time, Sandeep talked about the year 1997, was how exciting the 90s were. If you were in advertising, if you were in the media, it was a very, we were post-liberalization. It was a time of great optimism, and if you were in advertising, you were likely to be poached by everyone entering the country, right? So, Zee TV was launched, MTV came in for the first time, every other music channel was launched, media houses were coming in, agencies were shopping around for networks, for partners. So it was a great time to be in advertising. It was a great time to be a creative person in advertising at that time. And Rediff, of course, was in the heart of all the action. And I remember at that time, I can't tell you how many parties I've been to, MTV launch, CTV launch, Sony launch, only because friends from advertising had been poached and you got free passes to all the parties that happened. So as I said, it was a really good time, and advertising was this sort of mother lode of creativity, and where people came to, because the brightest brains were in advertising at that time. So wherever you were, if you were in advertising, it was a good thing. So as I said, I joined Rediff on this particular personal care thing. Things changed very quickly. But it was a particular time. As I said, it was a very intense time, even though it was a short time that I spent at Rediff. And I want you to imagine the mood at Rediff, because there was everyone you can imagine under one roof. There was, Rediff had just formalized, I think it had just about formalized its network, right? The Y&R relationship had been built, had been entered into, but the whole thing of local agency becoming part of a network, that transition was still happening. There was a lot happening with New York at that time. All the founders of the agency were around and available and very involved, whether it was Mr. Nanda, whether it was Ajit Balakrishnan, Dr. Bijapurkar, everyone. They were at Sterling Center, but they all came around. They were very accessible. Kamlesh Pandey was already a legend. He was a legend already when I was in college. He was a legend many times over. And he had moved to write his own films, but he was still a resource at Rediffusion. Adrian, many of you might know, Adrian Mendonca was a hugely awarded creative person who was at Rediffusion. Geeta Rao had been brought in from Burnett, I think, to handle the toothpaste part of the Colgate business, where we had lots of drama later. And I'm trying to figure out who. We had two creative directors, Kersi Katrak, I've got her name. Kersi, no, Prashant and Zarwan came in later. Kersi was, the great founder of MCM. And again, another legend in Indian advertising, the early years of advertising. He'd been brought in to work on projects. So there was Kersi in one of the rooms. Padma Challa had been brought in from New York as International Client Services Director on the Colgate business. And we had imported two creative directors from Australia for the Taj business. So now imagine the ferment and the excitement. And Bobby had left by then. So, it was this. Rahul and Bobby had left. So it was this flux, transition, excitement, and there were brands in crisis. There were brands, legacy brands demanding attention. There were international brands coming in and had to be put into the system. And then, of course, along came Sandeep. And within this whole conglomerate and all these people and all these various legends under one roof, there was Sandeep, who came in from Delhi with his own mandate and his own vision and the things that he needed to do. So it was an exciting time, it was a state of flux, and I do remember there were many battles, many brainstorms, many brilliant saves. We used to have something called the S Project. Sandeep, is that something that still happens?
No, we are going to revive that.
It was something that was really interesting. The S Projects, I think, stood for strategy. I'm not even sure what the S Project was. But everybody got roped in. And what happened at this time, as Sandeep mentions, there was this historic war between Colgate and Pepsodent. Unilever's Pepsodent, which was giving Colgate a huge run for its money. Everybody had panicked. Colgate, New York had panicked. The New York office had panicked. Wynar had panicked. Of course, Rediff had panicked. The Indian agency panicked because Unilever, being Unilever, played the game very differently. And Colgate was a much more laid-back marketer compared to Unilever. Pepsodent was creating waves in the market, so it was a huge time. And as a result, we were all roped into this famous S project for Colgate, and then we were roped in later for an S project for Maruti. And I have to say, some of those ideas that came in, which we were all thrown together in residence, packed away in a hotel to generate ideas. And everyone was there. Everyone was roped in, and everyone just did their bit. And I think it was very important because it built a lot of, obviously we made a lot of friends, and it built a huge amount of team spirit within the agency at that time. So it was great fun. I'd come in on Palmolive, but sadly all my budgets were cut because all the money had to go to Colgate. So a lot of budgets were cut. And that worked to my benefit as much because then I was good. Literally, whatever happened in the agency, I got roped into. There were new business pitches and there were all kinds of things happening. So it was as I said, ferment, excitement, drama, everything happening at the same time. I don't know if that's true today because Sandeep's still here, but I'm sure you have your own levels of excitement. But one of the things was, and I do remember BPL. Sandeep, do you remember that? That was a huge pitch because mobile telephony was coming of age. Forget coming of age, it had just been launched. And that was the time, none of you will remember, but I do remember the early years when Orange was launched. And if you went into that office at near Century Bazaar, it was like walking into a 5-star hotel. You were treated like a VIP. There were red carpets because you owned or you were going to buy a mobile phone and you were going to have a subscription. So until Mr. Ambani launched that great Reliance Revolution where you could buy a phone as well as a connection, until that it was a very VIP experience and you were very treated like literally 5-star, hushed carpet places and each person, there was a customer service for everybody. So there was Orange, which had launched, and there was BPL, which was the upstart coming in, but also giving Orange a run for its money. And Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who was the head, is now a Rajya Sabha member.
And as minister.
Minister, sorry. And but he was the chief of the business, and we had to present to him. And I remember there was Adrian leading that presentation, but we all had to work days and nights. And then, of course, I think Redif won the pitch. But I do remember Sandeep coming up with a brilliant idea. I think your cricket league was for BPL, right? Came up with a brilliant idea for a cricket league, which was actually part of swinging the business to us. And it was before apps and before the IPL. But I think he could have made such a brilliant app today if we had actually had apps in those days and ages. So that was what was happening all around, and it was lots of things happening. But one of the things that really stood out for me at Redif was how accessible everyone was, and how easygoing. You can imagine the pressure that everyone was under. You can imagine the egos at play. You can imagine how many things were happening. But it was just that everyone was available to you. People were easygoing. There were no blame games. You just had to, all hands on the deck. That was basically the attitude. And I think we all rolled up our sleeves and just did that. And when I talk about accessibility, I have an anecdote about Kamlesh. And Kamlesh, as I said, was a legend many times over. And I'd written a campaign for Femina Miss India. It was the precursor to the actual Miss India event. And I was presenting it and it had gone through. And then somebody said to me, get Kamlesh to translate it. So I said, why would Kamlesh Pandey translate the campaign? And Kamlesh was writing his film, so he was involved in a lot of sittings at that time, and he wasn't physically in office. And I think it was Carter who said, no, just go. He'll translate it for you. Go and get him to translate it. So there I went to Kamlesh and I said, okay, I have a campaign to translate it. And he was wonderful. He sat down in 1 hour. He kept all his sittings and various people who were waiting to hear his script, I presume, on hold. And he translated the campaign, he translated the body copy and the tagline. And he had 3 options for the tagline. And he said which one, and then we decided on the one we liked. And it was just so easy. He wasn't Kamlesh Pandey, the legend. He wasn't this great creative director. He was someone who was asked to translate from English to Hindi, and he did it. It was as simple as that. The sad thing is, of course, his Hindi lines sounded far better than the English finally. I mean, ruefully, I have to admit. So I remember the English said, when you dare to dream and dream to dare, extra care will get you there. Because extra care was the name of the Palmolive line of soaps. And extra care, that year, was the sponsor. And Kamlesh translated it, and it's a very similar translation, but it just sounds so much better. Because his translation was, जब सपनों के हौसले हो और हौसलों के सपने तो extra कैसे मिलती है मंजिलें. And of course, there was no question of not getting that line through. And it was just beautifully written. And I remember we had a song, and the Hindi song also sounded better than the English, sadly. But, it was so, I still remember that incident because there was absolutely no ego. And there was no, let me hand it to a junior, because there were other Hindi writers. And, it wasn't that Kamlesh was called up somebody and said, why don't you just do it? And it would have been very simple for him to do it, but he didn't. So, a great memory, and really very much what I consider the spirit of Hindi. And of course, Rappreet has already, and Sandeep all talked about the campaign that for me was very close to my heart, which was the 300 years of Khalsa, largely because it was nothing I'd ever done before. And you cannot get into talking about something that might be sensitive or something that has religious or political connotations and treat it like an FMCG brand. So that was a real learning for me. And I do remember that it had many stakeholders. So we had the Shiromani Prabandhak Khalsa Committee, we had the various global Sikh alliances who were sponsoring it, and finally it had to go on to the Chief Minister. So I'll tell you my part of it. You heard Rappreet and the story of my Patiala Salwar, which Sandeep also has written in his book, to my great embarrassment. I assure you it doesn't matter what you wear. But for a moment, I'll tell you why I had that Patiala stitch, by the way. And I had it stitched, I didn't buy it, I had it stitched. Okay. So as I said, it was very different from all the things I'd done before. And the wonderful thing was that it was immersive. And Abhijit Gune, a very talented art partner, my very talented art partner, and I had to spend time at the Golden Temple in Amritsar. And we were taken to every, I at one time knew every corridor, every back room, every place of the Golden Temple because I'd spent so much time getting to know it. Because if you're writing about something, you've got to immerse yourself, especially when it's something that needs a bit of depth. And I remember going to Shishganj Sahib in Delhi, Bangla Sahib in Delhi, just to get a sense, because we were writing about Sikh history, we were writing about the 10 Gurus in Sikhism. So it was a great immersion, lots of Sikh history to be studied. I think we got permission from Kushwant Singh to look at his book and to be able to use his book. There was a lot of effort that went into the campaign, and eventually we passed through many levels, and we came to the time when we had to present to Prakash Singh Badal, the Chief Minister, and protocol demanded that Mr. Nanda be there himself as the owner of the company, and Sandeep was going to come in to do the business presentation, the pitch, etc. And I think the night before, we were on hold because we weren't getting a date. And I think the night before, 2 nights before, both Sandeep and Mr. Nanda couldn't make it. And they were both called away. There was a crisis. I don't know if there was some client who was sacking us, or there was something that was happening. It was very critical. And there was lots of money involved in it. So both of them were not available. Nobody else was available to come down. So there was Rappreet and myself. And this is again, about no hierarchies at Rediff, everyone saying, just having faith. Because I remember Sandeep said, okay, that's the 2 of you. Rappreet was, I think, a senior account executive. I was a little more senior. So he said, you're the senior one, so go ahead, present. Don't forget, present the YNR credentials, present the money, present the business plan, present the strategy, present the creative, present everything. And I was a wreck. So, and we still didn't know. So we were on wait hold, and I'd run through the presentation. And I still remember YNR had so many millions of dollars for so many millions of things and so many brands, etc. And I said, this is not what I want to do. As it is, I hated standing up and presenting. But then I thought, maybe in the interest of authenticity, let me do the real thing. You know, maybe this will swing it. Let me wear a patiala suit. Because I didn't speak Punjabi. I mean, I understood Punjabi a little bit, but I didn't speak Punjabi. And most of the people in the presentation actually preferred the presentation in Punjabi and preferred hearing everything in Punjabi. So I said, in the interest of authenticity, and sure enough, Chandigarh has lovely places to get patialas done, and I got someone who stitched it and delivered it to the hotel, I think 2 hours, 1 hour before the presentation. It wasn't even, I remember it wasn't even one of my colors, but it was. There was in a patiala. I'd never worn a patiala before. And we presented, and as Ravpreet said, the presentation went well. And it must have gone well because we were invited to dinner with the chief minister. And I remember there was some protocol with that as well, because his wife had left. She didn't join the dinner because there were various other stakeholders there. And when we finished dinner, there was a pregnant pause at the table. And I had no idea why, because we don't finish, nobody knew what to do. And then the IAS officer who was sitting next to me said, "Madam, you're the senior person, senior lady. When the senior lady leaves the room, the rest of the people come." It was so different from anything I had ever done before or seen before. And again, when you were on Colgate or Unilever or any of the other businesses, it was so much more casual. You were on a first name basis with all your clients. But this was, as I said, the experience was priceless. It was really an amazing experience. And Sandeep, of course, was on fire. He was everywhere. And he's already told you some of the things he'd done. But Sandeep was passionate about new business. It was, I think his vision was very much to bring in new blood, new business, infuse a new energy into the agency. And he was all guns firing. And it was very difficult. Sandeep and I are very different people. Our approach to advertising is quite different. But Sandeep was just, the problem with Sandeep is that he has an idea a minute. So if you don't think as quickly, you can't keep up with him. So you've got to constantly scramble to get the idea. I better have my idea out there before Sandeep has an idea. But what I really loved about Sandeep was that he was there and he led from the front. So there was nothing that he wasn't going to do. He was out there. He was on every business. He was involved. He had great faith in the creative people. He had great faith in his creative partners. So that was always good. There was no blame if you didn't win the business, if something went wrong. There was no blame assigned to us at any point. And it was really a question, as I've said earlier, all hands on the deck, but about faith being reposed and the team working together as a team. So that was really something that I have learned and have seen. And Sandeep's amazing energy. Again, it's hard to keep up. Besides the ideas a minute, it's hard to keep up with his energy and his plans. But I think these are really random memories. And not really to give you names and to tell you, I never hark back to a golden age of advertising. I'm not a nostalgia seeker. That was what happened then, this is what happens now. But it was just to give you a sense of the mood and the spirit and the excitement and the fact that some of this must still be in the agency's DNA, even today. And I'm sure some of you respond to it and feel it, and feel what was happening. It's really important. I mean, communication has to pivot anyway. So you can't say, how great we were once upon a time. Everything changes. You've got to pivot. So this is one of the things. And I'll give you a couple of quotes that I have, which have always stood me in good stead, and I hope they help you. One is Alvin Toffler, the great futurist, who said the illiterates of the 21st century will be those who don't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I'm sure we've seen that already. New words have entered our vocabulary. I think metaverse, NFTs, we all know these words. These are new buzzwords. How do we use them in our communication? How do we make sense of them? How do we understand what that means? Because everything has pivoted. It's the consumer leading the content. So how do we lead the consumer back into the content that we want the consumer to consume? And we want the consumer to see. It'll always be a big challenge. Forget NFT and metaverse, forget all that. Words like vegan didn't exist, right? Gluten-free didn't exist. These have become, absolutely, these are marketing silos now. These are profit-making businesses now. And 5 years ago, there wouldn't be that many people who would have said vegan, gluten-free, whatever it is. So if we don't change, if we don't take cognizance of it, the consumer's already out there. And it doesn't need skills. The consumer doesn't need to know that there's artificial intelligence, doesn't need to know what virtual reality is behind something. It's really how simple we make complex technology for the consumer. So you don't need to know anything. I don't need to know as a consumer what VR does, what AI does. But when I go online onto Vero Moda or any of the other fashion houses, and I go into the online changing room, I know I can put in my details, I know I can put in my body shape and the dress I want to choose, and I can have a look at how I'm going to look. And finally, I will make a decision on what's most flattering. And that's really what every consumer wants, to buy the outfit that flatters him or her the most. And nobody cares how complex the technology is. But as advertisers and communicators, we really need to know what the idea is that informs such simplicity of communication. And it's getting more complex so that we make it more simple. We also think small towns have been left behind. We do know for a fact, there's data published, there are lots of trends reports published, that the biggest crypto adopters are young girls in small town India, right? So the smallest of small towns, I'm not talking about the mini metros, etc. They're the ones who are leading the great crypto adoption and evolution. What does that mean for us as consumers? What does that mean for us if we have a beauty brand? What does that mean for us if we have a fashion brand? What does that mean for us if we have any brand targeting a certain girl at a certain age? How do we bring all these trends and learnings into what we put into our communication instead of just looking at communication in silos? It's a really important thing. So that's really what change is all about. Vogue-advertising is something I write about and I talk about a lot. Maybe I can come into a separate section, but the world has changed. People have become more sensitive. Consumers are sensitive. If you don't have the right badges and the right buzzwords, your brand is going to be lost. No, and it doesn't matter if your advertising has the right words, if your brand stories don't have the right words, if your brand doesn't have the right philosophy, there's no point. Okay? So there's no point saying I'll smash the gender stereotype, or I'll change things, or I'll write about sustainability when your brand is actually polluting the environment. So you need to work these things. We've already seen it often with Tanishq. Tanishq gets itself into a lot of problems because it tries to be woke, then it backpedals. They can't be woke enough. They can't take a stand. And what are you doing for your brand? You're not being able to help your brand at all. So how do you do it? Right? There's a wonderful example of Nike. Colin Kirkpatrick, everyone who knows I think I got his name wrong, but you know, he took the knee. He supported Black Lives Matter. Nike supported him because they sponsored him. The backlash on Nike was terrible, right? So there were stores, people threatened to smash stores, people boycotted Nike, they lost a lot of brand sales. But they stuck with him and they continued the sponsorship. 1 year after the BLM movement started, you know, Nike had posted its highest profits in the last 5 years. And they continued because what they'd done was their brand had stood for a certain philosophy. The brand stood for it. It wasn't just about the communication. The communication just had him in hands, but the brand really stood for a certain kind of philosophy. And that's what brand stories are. That's what having your philosophy is, and that's what being woke is, and it's going to challenge everyone in this day and age. So again, wherever you have brands, wherever you have communication, what's the story you're going to be when it's really going to be important? Bill Bernbach, who was another great, said an idea can turn to magic or dust depending on the talent that rubs against it. And we often forget that it's everybody on the team. We think an idea, we got the idea, and we have unfortunately created a system of stars, of creative stars, people who function in silos, of one person owning the credit. But everyone actually does something. It's everyone's job. You polish till you shine at every stage of the communication. And I don't know how many of you were at Goa Fest and how many of you followed, but Applegram, if anyone's familiar with Applegram, anyone? Okay, so Applegram won the Grand Prix at the Goa Fest. A very simple idea. There was a lockdown in Kashmir and there was a media blackout in Kashmir, but there were people who wanted to send messages to their loved ones to say we're safe, but there was no way of reaching anyone. And there was somebody came up with the idea, the agency, I think that was Raj Kamte's agency, came up with the idea of Applegram because Kashmir sends apples to the rest of the country. So on cartons of apples, on each apple, and as you know, fruit now have a single sticker. So each sticker was designed from one family with a number, and there was an appeal to whoever bought the apple. So I could have bought the apple without knowing anyone, but it said, can you call this number? Can you call, say, can you call Geeta from Bombay and tell her that we are all safe? her family is safe in Sri Lanka? Or can you call X, Y, Y from wherever and tell them that their family up somewhere in Gulmarg is safe? And these were stickers, so there were strangers who were co-opted into the communication. There were strangers who were calling in people, and everyone got to know. So it's won many awards in other places as well. But it's not a TV idea, it's a physical idea, it's a real world idea, it's an idea that uses people and co-ops consumers themselves to be communicators. So it's a really wonderful idea. It just tells you, but think about it. If something had gone wrong, right? So the creative person came up with the idea, everybody thought of it, fantastic, you sourced everyone. What if the gum didn't work, right? You needed someone to even get that right, someone to supervise that right, someone to know that at every stage it couldn't go wrong. Because if the sticker didn't stick, that was the end of your idea. So it's really about, this Bill Bernbach quote is so fantastic because the dust is everywhere and it has to be cleaned at every stage when you can. There's another example I give. I don't know how we're doing for time, so I can drop it.
Okay. And I hope we are going to talk about tasty. Yeah?
I haven't put that in, but I can talk about it. I'll talk to you about one more, which is, I give this example a lot to my students, and you may also know it because it's quite widely awarded. It's a campaign from South Africa called Dress for Respect. Again, to illustrate what you can do with an idea and why an idea must be seen through to the end. So this was an idea where Schweppes took on the issue of sexual harassment at nightclubs in Brazil. The Dress for Respect was literally a dress designed with sensors that calculated in real time how often a woman was touched and groped in a nightclub. And there was a real-time room, okay? So it was linked to a control room where the numbers were displayed and those were flashed in screens at various clubs and bars. So over a period of 4 hours, I won't go into the whole case study, you can read it. There were 3 models, 3 women who wore the dress over 4 hours in one clubbing night. The dress recorded more than 157 not okay touches. Okay, so the sensors were such that it was the good touch, bad touch, and the sensor knew how to do that. They recorded 157 touches. Now you can just imagine, again, I'm going back, while it's a brilliant idea, I'm going back to this whole thing about polish till you shine, everyone involved. What if the technology and design had not worked? It's because there's a huge technical design into the dress. So it's not just fashion, it's a technical design and it's somebody linking you to a control room. So if at any stage, any of those links had not worked, this campaign wouldn't have worked. The campaign was hugely successful and what really worked was the amount of unearned, free media or whatever it's called, PR, that it generated. Millions and billions of dollars of free publicity because it was such a powerful campaign and worked and did a lot for the subject of sexual harassment. Right. And Tasty, I can talk a little bit about Tasty.
It was more the thought behind.
Yeah. Tasty was something, again, it was a Calcutta office thing, and Tasty was, I think we tried to capture, there was a feeling that women were going through, that homemakers were going through in the 90s. The feeling that they didn't want to be left behind. There was a lot going on about career women, single women, women in the job front, women in boardrooms. That was being celebrated a lot. So there was a lot of angst in homemakers. This feeling of, I don't want to be left behind. So we did this campaign for Tasty and we featured Shruti, who became a big actress later, I think. And the line was, Tez zamana hai, hum islo nahi chahte. And that line really resonated with consumers and in consumer groups. I think women felt somehow that somebody had understood that feeling, that they wanted to do just a little more, be appreciated just a little more. They didn't want to do it. So that was Tasty. Right. Sometimes, and I'll show you one last example before I end. Sometimes, again, we are in a hurry to find solutions. We think we know it all. We've come with all this experience. Oh, we can generate lines. We're so clever. And you learn suddenly that you may not have done all your homework. And I was called to do a master class by an NGO, and the master class was in Lucknow with grassroots level workers who worked largely in the area of gender justice, violence against women, and so on. And they came, Ayodhya, Faizabad, Bareilly, Muzaffarnagar, various places. So it was very much grassroots people from villages. None of them have money. So there are a lot of the Anganwadi workers, there are lots of the Sahelis. They all do their own campaigns. They all do their own posters. They all shoot their little films and they release those films wherever they can, or they send them on WhatsApp, however they do it. So it's very much a mind-opening experience and telling them what they could do. And there I was, let's have revolution and this is the time to smash the patriarchy. Gave them examples from Benetton, I gave them examples of all, there's a big feminist marching song, Main Bharat Ki Nani Hoon, Phool Nahi Chingari Hoon. It's a big song that we've all sung in the feminist movement in our youth. And so there was all this, and I was sort of very impressed with myself. And but none of them were looking very inspired. And so one lady then said, दीदी ये सब ठीक है, आपने बहुत अच्छा सुनाया, लेकिन हमारे यहाँ तो गोलियां चल जाती हैं. And that was like, are you kidding me? But that was true. And the point is, you don't understand. We talk about hinterland, we talk about what's happening, but we don't understand the real dangers. There are gender dynamics, there are power dynamics, there are caste dynamics, and women are often at the receiving end of them. So it's not about the clever headline. It's not about, hey, let's write that great slogan, let's write the marching song, because that wasn't. And the big lesson was that we really had to go back, not to the communication, but to identify where the problem was. And in our excitement and let's smash the patriarchy and let's change the world and let's have revolution, we didn't understand the real dangers. I didn't. And then of course we spent time in workshopping and with the masterclass, and I think we came up with some better solutions later. But that was a huge learning for me. It was sort of, after all these years, I should have thought better. I should have looked at things a little, asked more questions when I went in to do this. But this is the way it is that we learn. Again, last quote now, positively the last quote. I'm very grateful to the NGOs I have worked with. I consult with an NGO called Akshara, which does a lot of work in gender justice, primarily targeted for women, in favor of women, and with Point of View, which does a lot of work for the LGBTQI community. And that's also a gender issue, and they face a lot of gender issues. So it opened up a different world for me completely. And the same solutions that you bring for FMCG brands or for something else may not work. But you still have to think creative solutions. You still have to think out of the box for it. And on the other hand were my years at Vogue. Vogue was a completely different world. It was a completely different world from advertising because it was luxury marketing. I don't know how many of you read Cap Ferrer and luxury marketing, but you must know that when you enter the world of luxury marketing, you unlearn everything you learn from advertising, right? So the more difficult you make your brand, the more inaccessible your brand is, the more successful the luxury brand is. Whereas in advertising, you make it more accessible, you reach out to the consumer, you want more mass reach for your brands, everything is about numbers. And in luxury marketing, everything is about how exclusive you can make it. So it was a whole different world. And as I said, each stage you've got to unlearn, relearn to learn again. But it gave me again a window to another world. And I'm always grateful that I have had windows to so many worlds because the rules don't change. Finally, the rules are the rules of communication. That doesn't change. The ideas don't change. It's just the vehicles that change, the approach that changes. And someone sent me a quote, which I don't know whose quote this is, but it was sent to me when I was a junior copywriter. It stayed with me ever since. And it says, the human mind, once stretched, never returns to its original dimension. And it's like that Rorschach test, ink blot. The minute you see the woman in the ink blot, life changes. You have that aha experience. You get it. And I think as communicators, that's all we can do. Our consumers must get that aha experience. We must touch lives. In some way, in our own ways, we've got to make a difference to their lives. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful work. And great excitement to be there. Thanks. Yes.
Yes, now as usual you were wow and wonderful.
No.
Now
I should have sent an email with this.
I deliberately started the session by telling you about the branch manager I had to sack. Now there was a context to that. The context was what she presented in the last hour or so. So when you start your innings in a new job by sacking the branch manager, they're obviously not very popular. Worse still, there was no place for me to sit. They had never planned to have anybody in that office. So there were a small little alcove which used to seat 3 secretaries. So I looked around and they very categorically told me they didn't have a place for me to sit. So one fine day I just came and I drove out those 3 secretaries and converted that little alcove into my room, which must be the tiniest room for any president for an ad agency. But my next door neighbor over there was Geeta Rao, right? So next to that little alcove was one room almost perpendicular or whatever, where she used to sit, and every day when I would, get myself worked to a frenzy, I would come and sit with, Geeta, and we would share a cup of tea. And somehow I think that line, therefore, that तेज ज़माना है हमें slow नहीं चलना, became more and more relevant in my life, right? But today I'm also going to take the opportunity to remember 3 very special people. 2 very special to her and to me, but one person who's very special because of the narrative. In her narrative today, her name came up, and her name is Padma Challa.
Yes.
For Padma is no longer
with us.
Yeah.
Sad.
And I will tell you that story because it's part of the history of this agency. So I started again by telling you about this guy called Craig Middleton. Now, Craig Middleton is what they typically call the ugly American, right? So he was 6 feet something, and he was even then double my size. And all he used to do was to go boom, boom, boom. And he used to run the global business for Vyda. So that half story that I told you, and I wanted deliberately to leave it at half so that I could connect the second half of the story. Young and Rubicon, we were Rediffusion, Dentsu, Young and Rubicon. So that Young and Rubicon part of our life, even though they were 20% shareholders or 20% shareholders in the company, Young and Rubicon put Rediffusion on notice. So now that was pretty funny. Huh? So I asked Craig Middleton, I said, boss, how can you put us on notice? So he said, no, I have come here to move the business to McCann Erickson. So I said, boss, I don't understand this. I mean, you work for Young and Rubicon and you are going to move the business to McCann Erickson. He said, yes. I said, why? He said, because you guys don't listen. I said, listen, matlab kya hota hai? He said, globally, now this is what I'm trying to tell you, the world keeps changing. And it is not always that we understand or relate to what is changing. He said, globally, it is now a New York administered account. I am your client. The local client is not your client. No, I had never heard of these kind of things before. Because, Geeta subsequently, and I'm going to tell you that part also. So, as part of that bargain and that peacemaking, a 6 foot tall lady called Padma Challa arrived in our life. Yes? She was the first cousin of VVS Lakshman. And she was just half a shade below what I call the ugly American. Right? But I will tell you one thing, she's no longer with us. She taught me one hell of a lot about global business. See, we were a wonderful agency. We used to do fantastic work. Everything was fine. But we didn't understand what global brands were all about. Right? And as she told you, we were getting pummeled by levers. We, Colgate didn't have a clue as to what was happening to them. Now, if Colgate didn't know what was happening to them, you can understand what was happening to the agency. So, even though she's not here, one round of applause for Padma Challa and the wonderful years that she led the Colgate account at Rediffusion. Now, 2 very special, very special people who both Geeta and I'm sure, hold closest to our hearts. The first, of course, was Geeta's best friend, and that was Adip Puri. Yes?
Absolutely.
You have all seen the She is the Taj campaign. The original She is the Taj campaign was only the creation of one person, and that was Adip Puri. Yes?
That's right.
Adip Puri was by far one of the finest advertising persons I have ever worked with. Yeah? Thorough gentleman, great sense of humor, very, very well read, an opinion and everything. Most importantly, when Adeep spoke, clients listened. When Adeep had a point of view, he sold the advertising. Most importantly, Adeep knew his stuff. So I'm very, very, very proud of the fact that this agency had stalwarts like Adeep Puri working at Rediffusion. One more round of applause for Adeep Puri, who unfortunately again is no longer with us.
My greatest loss.
Hmm?
What a dear friend.
He was a phenomenal guy. Last but not the least, again, someone no longer with us, but someone who built this agency in no measure lesser than the founders of this agency, a phenomenal human being, one of the nicest people who has ever walked the agency, Conrad Saldana. You would again agree?
I agree.
Phenomenal gentleman. So we've had some really nice people, intelligent people, great professionals who have graced this agency, and one of your finest examples is here,
Thank you.
right? I deliberately kept out the introduction. Geeta Rao doesn't require an introduction.
I don't. I
Yeah.
will introduce myself.
And fact of the matter is, she is today one of the fairest voices in the world of fashion, beauty, wellness, right? The last of the stories which I must tell you, because Tanya is here and we must acknowledge that. I was coming back from one of my most difficult business trips ever, which was trying to woo Dentsu into a joint venture. I was all alone, no company, no employee, no office, nothing. And in the midst of all those presentations that were going on, my biggest competitors were people like Sam Balsara, Leo Burnett, God knows how many others. Finally, one day, Tanya and I were both invited to Dentsu headquarters in Tokyo. We spent 1 week in Tokyo. And this is for all of you to understand. 7 days, 21 meals. Every single meal was an interview. So some new gentleman, some new head of some division would be meeting us just to chat us up, almost like when you get into marriage to figure out ये बंदे ठीक हैं यार ये, right? So after that one full stressful week of meeting all those very difficult people, Tanya and I decided to change our tickets, not come back directly to Delhi, but head out to Bangkok. And who was the one person we spent almost that entire week in Bangkok? Geeta Rao. Yes?
Yes.
So
I was posted in Bangkok. I worked in the region, yeah.
So, the reason again for spending so much time with Geeta when we were coming back, we knew spending time with Geeta would calm us down, right? Thank you, Geeta, for a fabulous session.
Thank you for having me.
Right?
Thank you.
And if you have any questions, they are more than welcome. We have enough time. We are not running anywhere. So, any questions for Geeta? Very welcome. Please ask her anything. I'm sure she'll give you some interesting answers. And when we finish off, Kalyani will move the vote of thanks. But again, यार ऐसा मत करो यार कुछ तो.
I just want to say, while Sandeep had these 21 interviews, I was interviewed in true Rediff style when Rediff was hiring me. There was only one way anyone was interviewed at Rediff. It was a drink at Jewel of India with Conrad Saldana. That's the only way. Jewel of India was an extension, the bar, I don't even know if it's there, but that bar was an extension of Rediffusion. Any meeting, any hiring was always at that bar.
देख ले जय.
So you better find a place like that.
Area to over. It was also an extension. Best is best.
Conrad Saldana.
If you were not at Sterling,
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Let me bring myself to say.
I don't think there would be anybody who
Was
has
not
not done.
Not
And help real life.
Questions?
Geeta, tell us about your most memorable line or campaign or whatever you
you felt that was your greatest achievement?
Love and Dove.
I think so. Yeah, I think, well, as I said, I don't look back and I've moved on and done so many things. But I think Dove was quite close to my heart. You know, I worked at Ogilvy, I spent quite a lot of time at Ogilvy as well. And I think I mentioned to Kaiman that I would not have left Rediffusion, except for the fact that Ogilvy made me an offer that I couldn't refuse because they were the only agency that was putting together all the beauty brands, Lakme, Pond's, Dove, Avian's, Pears Naturals, and I was going to help that. So for me, it was very much part of where my career trajectory was taking me. There was no other reason to leave. But anyway, I was very happy about the launch of Dove in India. I worked on lots of brands. I worked on Cadbury's, I worked on Asian Paints. But I think Dove was fun and Dove was testimonials, the kind of women we hired. But there was this one line that I'd written. He said, "Is it love?" I said, "No, it's Dove." And that we got one of the models to say, she was speaking in Hindi, but she broke off and said this. And then, she was a very shy person. It was actually Gayatri Pandey who was the model. She's married to the filmmaker Prasun Pandey. But this was years ago. And she blushed, she found that very corny. And we captured that blush. We kept the camera rolling. She said it so well. And that line, I think, came up again and again for years when we used to do consumer groups on any beauty brands. Forget, Dove or anything else. Even after I was, and I remember when I was working on Neutrogena, that line came out. So there was something. And again, as I said, like the Tejas line, what resonated? This need for romance in life. The fact that this woman, this very shy girl, could have this very witty repartee, with her husband. All of that, and it takes you back. Things aren't like that now. But those were the times when even something small like that. There was another line which I didn't write, but I wish I had for Ericsson, which was "One black coffee, please." And that's a very simple ad for a mobile phone. And there was a woman talking on the mobile phone. But it's a small phone, so you can't see it. And she's sort of smiling and talking. And there's a guy at the restaurant table who thinks she's giving him a sort of come on to my table. So he walks across to the table and she looks up at him and as if she's talking to the waiter, she says, "One black coffee, please." And what people didn't forget the phone, people remember that line. Because that line became a line of the confident, independent woman of the 90s. So, as I said, the 90s were a time when even small things, which we take for granted now, were considered big.
Yeah, from the other offices, if anybody has a question. Ruchira.
Hey, where's
Ruchira is in Bangalore. Yes.
Hi guys, if anyone's there, we welcome any questions from you.
What was it like?
Okay,
What took you to?
Okay.
And actually, even I have a follow-up question to
Yes.
that. And what made you actually join Vogue? I've read somewhere 1/4 the salary that you were drawing.
I hope that's not in the ad, because it has to go out immediately. I haven't had a very straight advertising path or graph, and I was very keen on always doing other things. Vogue for me, I saw the luxury market opening up, and I'd worked a lot on beauty brands. My last assignment was as regional creative director in the Asia Pacific on the Dove business. And a lot of luxury brands were coming into the country at that time. And it was a huge opening. I think people didn't know enough about luxury, people weren't really aware. So when Vogue was being launched, I said, I have to find a way of joining Vogue, and this is where I want to be. I used to write a lot otherwise. I used to contribute a lot to publications as well. So I had been writing a lot on various things. And Alex Kuruvilla, who's also an ex-advertising man, was heading Vogue. And I remember that time I called him up and I said, "Alex, marketing is the only job I can do at Vogue, I think, because after all my years in advertising." And he said, "No, we've got our clients we have a mandate from Condé Nast internationally for beauty and for a beauty editor. And the reason is because in India, we are going to focus more as much on beauty as on fashion, because the Indian market wasn't ready for fashion. Not the level of fashion that Vogue had. The brands hadn't come in. So Chanel hadn't come in, the Gucci's hadn't come in. They were coming in at that time. So to even educate people, whereas the beauty business was booming. And beauty just continues to grow and grow and grow. I'm not complaining. So that was why I joined Vogue. It was the most wonderful experience for luxury. But being part of the launch team became part of launching, understanding where India was. How did you actually make a mix, the international Indian version of Vogue? Because you couldn't alienate anyone in India. You couldn't alienate the Indian luxury consumer. Was a small, very small sliver, and it wasn't really the luxury consumer that you're used to in the West. So how do you get people to spend money? How do you get people? How do you also build that market? How do you build that consumer? And now you can see all brands are here, the Indian consumers. We've seen the social media boom. Everyone's very aware of everything. But earlier, the history, the legacy, and luxury, as I said, is all about legacy and understanding. So if you speak to an average French consumer, they'll be able to tell you why it's important to buy an Hermes scarf or why a Birkin bag is an investment. You may not find the same attitude because these are not legacy brands in India, but now they are. People are understanding what the market is. There is a lot of money in India. So there's a difference between money and having a luxury market. So how do you then build the luxury market? It was a very exciting time. Also, being at Vogue gave you full access to all of Condé Nast and all the facilities and all the resources of Condé Nast. So if you wanted Irving Penn or David Bailey or any of the legendary photographers, you wanted to look at any resource, you wanted to look at the old files, they were open access for everyone. Anything that you wanted from across the world was available. It was a huge learning and a great time to be.
Thank God it's Friday. It's the Friday feeling now. Everyone can go.
I have more questions, but I think I'll ask it separately. But thank you so much, Geeta. Thank you. Million thanks for your time. But when Rafpreet was talking about your Hindi, I must quote this line that Geeta wrote for us for a recent campaign for Taj, and it was actually for Festivals of India. You hear we're talking about her Hindi as if she spoke to the soul of India. And I would actually quote your line. It says, "A feast for the eyes, poetry for the soul, where gods join the celebrations and humans celebrate the world." I think it was beautiful, whether she knows Hindi or not. But I think we struggled. We were struggling for almost 2 months to crack, and with Geeta, this starting line, and the client was like, "Wow, this is it," and we had to do it. So thank you, Geeta, and thank you everyone.